Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming along to the Safeguarding, Overview and Scrutiny Committee this morning. Can I start by wishing everyone a Happy New Year, a little belated. And we'll go straight into the agenda. And item 1, the apologies.
No apologies, Chair.
Thank you. Item 2, then, any declarations of interest? No. Actually, probably just a little remiss of me, just before we go into item 3. I've seen a few people that perhaps haven't been here before, and I think it would be courteous if we all went round and just introduced ourselves. So for those who don't know, they know who everyone is. I'm Bob Spencer. I'm a county councillor in South Staffs, and I'm the chair of this committee.
I'm Jill Burnett, and I'm the Vice Chair and Councillor for Kidsgrove and Ravenscliffe.
Good morning, Councillor Mike Wilcox, County Councillor for Burntwood South.
Hello, Gillian Pardesi, County Councillor for Stafford Central.
Johnny McMahon, County Councillor for Hensford and Rawnsley.
Good morning, I'm Janet Eagland and I'm the County Councillor for Lichfield Rural North.
So I'm Conor Wildman and I'm the County Councillor for Burton Tower Division, which is Winshill and Brislingcote.
Councillor Kath Perry, I'm the representative of the County Council for Chesley, Great Worley and Essington. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Ian Varnell. I am the Independent Chair and Scrutineer of the Staffordshire Safeguarding Children's Board.
Good morning, I'm Jo Couch. I'm Assistant Director of Adult Social Care and Safeguarding here at the County Council and Director of Adult Social Care at MPFT.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Ruth Martin, Principal Social Worker and Safeguarding Lead for Staffordshire County Council.
Good morning, I'm Helen Jones and I'm the Staffordshire and Stoke-on-Trent Adult Safeguarding Partnership Board Business Manager.
Good morning, everyone. I'm John Wood. I'm the Independent Chair of the Staffordshire and Stoke-on-Trent Adult Safeguarding Partnership Board. I've got to just take in Helen's, couldn't I?
Good morning, my name is Paul Northcott, County Councillor for Newcastle Rural. I'm also the Cabinet Support Member for Safeguarding, ICS and Public Health. Thank you.
And I'm Helen Phillips and I am the Scrutiny and Support Officer for this scrutiny meeting.
Thank you very much. Item 3 then, the minutes of the Safeguarding ONS meeting held on the 24th of November. I assume everyone's had the opportunity to look through them, or are there any issues, or can I sign them as an accurate record? Item 4, into the first of the reports, then, the Adult Safeguarding Transformation Project, which is on page 7 of the pack. Is anyone going to... Thank you. Paul, I think over to you.
Good morning, thank you, Chairman. I'm delighted to introduce this item. Members that have been on here for quite a while will have perhaps read and remembered the last report that came to this committee from the Adult Safeguarding Transformation Project in September 2021. This report is to give members an update on that from what we've done as an authority and recognise where we were at the back end, tail end of 2020 to where we are now in terms of addressing our obligations, not only for the Section 42 obligations as an authority, but the other safeguarding concerns that were presented as an authority. Members will have seen from the table that we've had quite a few safeguarding concerns, and that's not to be underestimated. And this report goes into some depth into how we cope with that, how we planned not only to address the backlog, which members can see that's been successfully addressed, and that's a good news story for us. But also the contingencies that we've got now in place to recognise potential increases in the future, and to reassure members that the council is on top of its obligations in terms of the safeguarding commitments that we have. Before I hand over to officers, it's something that's very close to my heart in terms of how we maintain that quality assurance going forward as a council, how we take into account the key performance indicators that we're expecting to make in terms of the decision-making process. And basically, the contract that we need to address in terms of meeting the time-bound obligations in terms of assessments and contacts closed within working days of that. So I'll hand you now over to perhaps Joe, who would like to take over from myself. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And I will very swiftly hand on to Ruth, who prepared the report and will talk us through it. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, Paul, for that as well. I think you gave a great overview of... I can do my best. I'm quite short. This is not designed for people of 5'2" and under. So I will lean. I hope you don't think that's rude. Thank you ever so much for that introduction. I think that's covered a lot of the sort of main points as well that I was going to make. Those of you who have been with me through this journey of transforming our safeguarding response in adults, hopefully will see I am going to use the word incredible steps forward we have made over recent months to address the increases that we have been receiving in safeguarding concerns. It goes without saying that obviously this isn't done by me alone, and I have an amazing team of social workers and supportive staff who have worked hard alongside me to address the concerns, and with the support of managers as well above me, Joe and Richard in particular, who have been instrumental in allowing us to develop the service to where it needs to be today. What I would say is unfortunately, or fortunately I should say, this still continues to be a journey. There are still elements of this that we need to continue to work on and address, and I'm sure yourselves have been able to pick that up in the report. Whilst we have been able to manage the backlog, and we are now working much more within reasonable timeframes. As I looked at it this morning, the concerns that are waiting for a formal decision to be made are no more than 3 weeks old, which is a considerable improvement from where we were a number of months ago, where they may have been waiting for closure for a lot longer. But what we need to be doing is improving on that. You will see that our working days, the numbers of concerns that we're able to manage within 2 to 3 working days, is still below where we would want that to be. So that's where we continue to look for how we can improve and address that in a far more timely way. And we're doing that by looking at our duty function, so the social workers looking at things and trying to look at it only once to make a decision in the most timely way, not doing too much prioritisation and putting things where it needs to go as soon as possible. And to do that, it's about upskilling the staff. So over the next month, we've got a number of sessions along with the management team to be helping them to reflect, review our risk assessment process so that actually we're all working in the same way. So no matter who looks at the concern, we're getting that good consistency in response, being able to identify areas of, as we call it, research that need to be done on that before we can make the decision as early as possible, so we can set people off on the right foot. So hopefully those sessions will help the team to further develop and feel more confident to help them make those decisions in a timely way. So as I say, whilst we sit here today in a really positive position, please rest assured that we're not sitting here thinking, oh, thank goodness for that. We're through the drama, we can rest on our laurels. This is absolutely the time where we need to continue with that improvement, continue to see how we can improve. Because you will see that in recent weeks there has been some decrease in the number of concerns coming through. So we need to be balancing, obviously, if we were to get that sudden peak, how would we respond again? How would we ensure we don't find ourselves in that position again? So we need to be looking at that contingency plan in some more detail to make sure that the team have got something that they can grab onto as soon as we start to see that increase, and not leave it as long as maybe we did last time. So we've got a quicker response that enables us to manage that demand more effectively. And hopefully then that will enable us to be more resilient as we move into the future. Thank you.
Thank you for that. As I say, I think it is a very encouraging report. Councillor Wilcox.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you. Excellent report, Ruth, I have to say. Very in-depth and very informative. Just wanting to go back to there's a paragraph on page 8 which talks about the number increasing between May and September of safeguarding concerns. And I just wondered whether any pattern had developed in that period of any trends perhaps coming forward as to why there was an increase in between those months, and whether it's just across the board there just happened to be those months an increase. Just a bit more information and data on what type of issues are the increasing areas. Thanks, Chair.
No, thank you for that. And I do believe it's a really pertinent question. It's something that we're really mindful of. And actually, it was just across the board. So there was no one particular area where we saw any kind of increase. What we have been doing, though, is looking at it year on year. We'll be able to do that far more effectively going forward. Now, our recording is much more consistent, and we're picking up much more of the responses. So actually, what we hope to be able to do then is over a period of the next couple of years, be able to see as to whether we do get natural trends in peaks, which will help us then obviously look at how we build in our contingency. Whilst we can see that we often do get peaks around that time of year, this year was of particular note. And whether we're going to see that again going forward is something we need to monitor. But with regards to types of abuse, there didn't appear to be any particular increase in one area or another. We did wonder whether it was still the sort of post-COVID effect, but that's difficult to quantify. Interestingly, though, other local authorities were also experiencing the same increase. So we weren't alone in that. And it was also replicated in an increase in overall referrals within the adult social care, for assessments and reviews, etc. So that general increase does appear to have generated across the board. So it would have almost been nice to have got that increase in a particular area to see if it was something we could target more effectively.
Thank you. Councillor Mahon.
Thank you. I've got 3 questions, if I may. The first one, on reflection, I think is unanswerable, but I'll ask the question. Homes and care homes referrals seem to be on the up from what I can read. And it's particularly the homes one that concerns me. And in John's report that comes next on the adult social care, adult safeguarding piece for the county, there's a talk about hidden neglect. And we don't know what we don't know. But are you satisfied that we're doing everything we can do to pick up what would otherwise be classified as hidden neglect? That's the first question. I'll let you do that first, then I'll ask you.
I was going to say I could actually forget your first question by the time we got to the third, so I appreciate you allowing me to answer that. I think, there are some questions that are really difficult to answer. However, I do like to think we've got some quite robust practices in place, not just within adult social care, but across our commissioning colleagues, and also the relationships we have with partner agencies as well, to try and uncover where there is potential for hidden abuse. So obviously engaging with CQC, assume you're all aware of our sort of QUISM, our joint meeting to look at high risk and providers of concern. But we're also developing this year some much better relationships with the, Baz from the Health Watch. Oh, just, you know, that post-Christmas, Tommy still affecting my brain. Yes, so with Health Watch, and what we're looking in is helping them to identify different agencies or different hospitals, homes, etc., where they actually can gain entry to do some more of that work to try and identify if we are missing anything. Some of the hidden abuse that's far more difficult to identify is that happening within people's own homes. Now, for me, that's about raising awareness of other professionals who potentially have contact with them. So working alongside our GP practices, etc., trying to get to those people that may not automatically come into, you know, to see adult social care as a sort of first port of call to see what we can do. But as well, hopefully using learning from any safeguarding inquiries that we get or safeguarding adult reviews that come across to identify those areas which maybe we do need to give some more consideration to. I would never sit here and say I think we've got it lickety-split, but I do think that we're doing what we can, and we're very much aware that there's always more we could be doing. Thank you.
Neglect is now going directly for Care Act assessments rather than through Section 42s, which clearly helps the system in terms of traffic flow, if you like, of cases. Are you satisfied that it remains in the best interests of the client?
Thank you for that. And again, that's a very insightful question to ask. We've done this primarily because actually, from a safeguarding point of view, we should always have tried other avenues before we instigate something like a Section 42, particularly when it comes to self-neglect. Because for self-neglect, under the Care Act, somebody would need to have capacity. So for a lot of people there, they're making some decisions for themselves. So it's how best we can support people. So sometimes actually by putting something in a formal process that the person is aware of can actually make it feel a bit more oppressive to the individual. So occasionally it is better for us to do that. But the one thing that I would pick up from that, and something that I have noted of late, is the need for us to be supporting our social work teams out there with recognising when actually that self-neglect does require a Section 42. It would be wrong of me to sit here to say every time they're not able to get the response that they think that it's coming back in as it should do. So we do monitor that through audits, etc., to be looking at that. And we are reviewing our training, our safeguarding training programme across the board for all social work staff, so that actually we're going to help them much better be able to support people and then raise the concern as a Section 42 inquiry when they feel that that's appropriate. So I do think that there's work to be done, but I like to think we are aware of where we've got those potential risks for things to be missed.
Thank you. A related one, really. The Quality Assurance team looks at Care Director and looks at the providers that perhaps overuse Section 42s and the safeguarding pathway. But clearly these people have got to go elsewhere. In addressing the demand for safeguarding, are we having a disproportionate hit on the Care Act assessment part of the business? And how's that dynamic looking? Thank you, that's it after that.
We haven't noticed that that's had any more of a significant impact than it ever has done. So our changes to our pathway doesn't appear to have done that. We have quite a loop before where actually what we were doing is passing people unnecessarily through a protracted, so handoffs as it were, from different parts of the department. So actually what they currently receive is what people have always received in the end. So area teams have always ended up receiving them. They're just getting it that bit quicker in the main. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
does that answer your question? it is always a balancing act, isn't it? And it's a bit like with the quality assurance teams, so with our colleagues in commissioning. If we're not dealing with it under safeguarding, are we just going to push it through to another area, part of the team to deal with? And that's why it's always about us working together. And that's why nothing that we make a decision on as a service, as a safeguarding service, we do in isolation. We always make sure that we're looking at our key stakeholders, you know, as in the other teams who we feed work out to understand the potential impact on them of any change we might make before we make it. Because the one thing I know is if you don't know what's happening in another part of a service and all of a sudden you've got a load of work that you had no idea where it's coming from, actually we're just creating problems, aren't we? So it's really important that we recognise that early on, understanding the business world that we work in and the environment and the importance of us being able to work together to safeguard people as effectively as possible is absolutely key to that. So that communication early on before we make changes is absolutely what we have to do, and we've got better over time with that. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Just a couple of questions from me. We have seen quite a large, I think well over 50% increase since 2017, yet the number of 42 referrals has gone down. Does that tend to suggest then that that peak is of, when I say less important concerns? Is there a danger, and I think you alluded to it previously, that if we let that run away, then you miss the really serious stuff that we should be seeing because we're overwhelmed with an increase in, I keep saying less important, I don't mean to make a value judgment when I say that. But there is a danger, isn't there, if the workload doubles or increases by 50%, but our Section 42 referrals start to drop off. Is that because people are overwhelmed, or is it because our Section 42 assessments maintain that credibility throughout and are dispassionate in the way that they're done? And also then coming back to the point that's been raised several times, is that we don't seem to understand or have that diagnostic bit, do we, about why the increase has happened where it's come from. And isn't that worrying that we don't know that granular detail of what that is? And for example, on item 6 there, we have that inevitable sawtooth graph, and I think I made the point at last year's meeting. That would be largely unacceptable now in an organisation just to put that, because there's no significance measurement on it, is there? There's nothing that says, when does this become an issue? It just shows that it goes up and down. And the danger with that sort of thing is that we chase it when it goes up, and that might just be, it's going up this month, it'll come down next month. We need some form of better understanding, some form of significance measurement. And actually those things are out there. You know, the police, Staffordshire Police, use something called SPC, which tells them when to be concerned about rising and lowering levels of various other things, which I think would suit this. So I just wonder, are there any plans to perhaps make the data here a little bit, well, a bit more sophisticated to help us understand what that picture is, therefore put us in a better position to manage that workload as we go forward? I just rambled on there. There was probably 3 or 4 questions in there.
I think there was, but I am going to do my best to answer them all. So the first part that you mentioned was obviously the rise and how that impacts on decision making and how the practitioners almost manage that. And, you know, when you look at that, yes, comparatively and statistically, the numbers of the ones we convert into a full Section 42 is decreasing. Now, I have looked at this, and I did quite an extensive audit of closures just to see as to whether I could see as to whether things were being closed when they should have gone through for inquiry. Because obviously one of the first things is when you see an increase in closures is, did they all need to be closed? So we did quite an extensive audit and actually reported that to the board to have that looked at by partners as well. what was interesting for me, having looked at quite a number of those, was that actually those closures were appropriate. I think some of it comes down to us getting more skilled in our ability to identify those over time that require a Section 42. You know, it has only been in some ways, the Section 42 for in the life cycle of adult social care, a comparatively short period of time. So the finessing of that decision making, really understanding where we can make a difference through a formal Section 42 inquiry, and also developing confidence in those other in other agencies who have equal responsibility to address some of the concerns that come through. I think that's played a part in it. You're absolutely right, though, that demand does impact on decision-making. If you're sat there and you're getting, say, 100 through a day, it's actually a constant pressure to get to the next one, to be making sure that you're looking at that. And that's why we're looking at that duty function, to try and remove people and help them just to be able to concentrate on that initial risk assessment so that that's clear and that they're able to spend the time they need to really address that, from maybe some of the work that needs a bit more in-depth inquiry into it and then reviewing that information afterwards. Hopefully then that gives people the headspace. And I will say, you know, having those of you who might remember, I used to be one of the advanced practitioners on the team. I know very much how decision-making fatigue can influence decision-making. So we need to give people the headspace and the reflection time to ensure that that decision-making is consistent throughout, and that actually they've got the support around them to be able to manage that. And that's really important. And that's why we do audits as well, to be having a look at cases dispassionately, a way to see as to whether the information they had at the time, that they were making sound decisions. They also have regular reflective sessions with one of the managers as well, to help them look back at that, to help them improve on those decisions. So hopefully we've got some systems in place to try and prevent some of that risk. One thing that I'm really keen on us trying to do is look at what is actually, you know, where our risks actually sit. There's a lot of uncertainty in adult social care over where things will go, changes governments could make, you know, decisions that can be reached that influence the work we do. But for me and for us as an organisation, we have to look at what is a quantifiable risk. So what can we do to manage things? We've got data that shows us as the risk. And that's why I completely agree with you that we do need to look at some sophistication in our management. Like, where's the point in monitoring the numbers over time if we're doing nothing with it? Because actually, it isn't going to be providing us with any support. So I think it is an element of that that we need to be bringing into our contingency planning for the future, not just in safeguarding, but for adult social care as a whole. When you look across the country, it isn't widely used. It is, as you say, in the police, and I know in health as well, that they use systems that identify potential peaks, peak times, etc. So I do think we need to be looking at something to see as to whether there are systems out there that could support us to manage that far more effectively. Don't know that I covered all your points.
No, thank you. Yeah, it is. No, I do think it would benefit from that sort of an analysis. You yourself talked about, you know, how do we respond next time? If you understand when the next time is likely to be, you are ahead of the game, aren't you, and ahead of the curve, so to speak. And these things are available almost off the shelf. And I think that when we have this typical, as it tends to be here, that sort of Pareto type analysis, you know, where 80% of the work is on 20% of the people, then if you massively increase that population, you stand a chance of missing the 20%, don't you? You know, and I think a better understanding of why we see significant increases would enable perhaps practitioners to have more confidence in signing them off quicker or doing various other bits and pieces, but almost sort of poking around in the dark. You can understand the reluctance of a practitioner to do that, certainly in this day and age. Having said that, I don't think there's any more questions, I wouldn't want to finish on a negative. I think this is an incredibly positive report. We seem to have grasped the problem around how we manage this steady increase in referrals in a really difficult and challenging area as adult social care must be. And one of the reports that follows, talks about some of these young people, some of these people rather being exposed to significant amounts of violence, even rape, I think, sometimes. So, these are important, serious issues, and we naturally owe it to those individuals to make sure that we get this process right. And I think we're moving really, quickly towards that. So, thank you for all your efforts. Thank you for coming and running us through the report. Connor, I think you want to say.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I was just looking at the data, and I was thinking about referrers themselves and whether we actually monitor them and see whether they are actually sending us reasonable, fair referrers or referring data or whatever you want to call it. Because I think maybe is it the referrers that are perhaps not getting the criteria right, so that when they send things through, then it increases your workload. Do we monitor that and then try and work with them and train them as such to try and ensure that those referrals are what you would want to see? Thank you.
Thank you for that. Yeah, absolutely. I think our relationship with our referrers is really important. So we do a number of things around that, and quite recently we were doing a lot of work with our quality assurance team about working with our providers. The vast majority of our concerns come from care providers. So we're giving them some guidance, some additional guidance and flow charts, if you like, to help them to navigate the complexity of decision making. Another element of that is work that we've done as well through the board, and that we're continuing to do through the board with our colleagues over in Stoke-on-Trent, is working alongside as well CQC to pull together a meeting so that CQC, our local CQC officers, are giving the same message as we are as to what needs referring in. Because actually our providers, rightly so, listen to what the regulator tells them, and if the regulator tells them they should refer something, then they refer things in. But what we've also done through our auditing system through the board is have our partners who sit at the board bring in and review their safeguarding referrals to see as well as to whether what they're referring in is what we'd expect. Are they referring in what they need to? And some work we've done in the MASH is working with our police colleagues to see as to actually whether they are referring in what they need to at the right time. So are they recognising the signs of potential care and support needs? And actually are they understanding that, for want of a better word, criteria that we're looking at for as part of the requirement for a Section 42? But I do think it's a really important area where we could, now we're getting much more to grips with how we need to work, where we can do further work with our referrers, widening that out to other partners, not just those that we already have established relationships with. Does that answer your...
It does answer my question. You put it far more eloquently than I could ever do. I'm having Thursday morning fatigue, shall we say, over here with the dim lights and whatever. No, it certainly does answer my question. Thank you.
Thank you for that. We seem to have generated more questions. Councillor Wilcock.
Thank you, Chairman. Ruth, the second highest type of abuse is financial abuse. And when we look at where the location of abuse is, much of it happens at home. And I wonder whether there's any correlation between the financial abuse and these people at home, in as much as are the perpetrators perhaps family members who are conducting this financial abuse. I mean, financial abuse is such a massive area. And if we can understand where the majority of that is coming from and put things in place, because without doubt, that area will probably increase in numbers. My thought would probably be going forward. I mean, it's interesting that it's higher than physical harm now, the financial abuse. And I just wonder if there's any lessons there or anything more we can do or training that can be put in place to identify where it's coming from and whether or not actually it is in the home happening by family members. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, so financial abuse was actually a board priority in our previous year, and it is actually, you're right, it is an increasing concern, and for a long time was part of the sort of hidden abuse as well, because it does quite often occur between family members. And as you rightly point out, it is so vast. When we look at financial, it's financial and material abuse, so it's the theft of anything, it's the taking of money, it's the misuse of benefits, it covers such a broad range that it's really been, hence why it was a board priority, really important that we try to understand what we needed to do and how we needed to respond. So we have had some training sessions around that have been put on by the board in relation to financial abuse. Unfortunately, it did occur during COVID times, didn't it? The majority of the financial abuse priority. But actually, we were still really quite effective at, at trying to get the training out to people and looking at how we can support. For me, with financial abuse, it's such a personal thing a lot of the time to the individuals that actually it's about how we support people and actually the skills and the tools that we give to a variety of practitioners who are working with them, not just our social work staff, but other professionals who are going out there and supporting people alongside sort of visiting financial officers and our benefits colleagues over in the benefits departments, etc. And I think there's always going to be further work that we can do. And you're absolutely right. I think now we recognise that potential impact, and that potential increase. A number of our more significant ones are where family members use, the finances of a loved one who's moved into a care home, where they've got powers through the court to be able to do that. And it's how we engage with our with the OPG, the Office of Public Guardian, who help us to monitor that. And I think we need to get better at recognising it earlier on so that we can put support things in place for people. And most probably, is it, like I say, is that area that you think there's always more we could do there. And I think that would be my sort of honest reflection. We've got a good grasp of it, but it's something we need to continue to monitor.
Thank you for that. Councillor Mahan, I think you wanted to ask another. Put the microphone on, John.
Anybody should know that it's me. It's just following on from Connor's point. I think it's section 9D of the report. The quality assurance team now interrogates care director, if I'm right in saying so, to look at the quality of referrals. And I'm just wondering whether the NHS, particularly YMAS, is a particular hit in this regard that's getting worse because of the difficulties that the NHS currently finds itself. And if that is the case, what sort of discussions are going on such that more appropriate referrals are made? Because it strikes me that making a safeguarding referral, if you're in a rush in the back of if you're a paramedic going from A to B quickly, making a quick safeguarding referral is more time effective than going through a different channel and using the Care Act, perhaps. This difficulty isn't going to go away. It's likely to perpetuate for some time, and therefore I just wonder what's going on.
So West Midlands Ambulance Service are a frequent referrer. They're also a referrer who frequently we close down their concerns as not requiring a Section 42 inquiry. As with all referrers, we do give them feedback to let them know that we've closed it down and for the reasons that we have. We've also engaged, so through our regional colleagues, we've also engaged and given feedback and some evidence as well to support the concerns that we've had. The way the service is commissioned is interesting because obviously it's across the West Midlands and it's commissioned. The lead commissioner is Sandwell. Thank you, Helen. Is Sandwell, what was the CCG, so the ICB. So they're the lead commissioner. So they, in effect, have the ability to engage West Midlands Ambulance Services into some sort of firmer discussions We have met with them, and I met with them a number of years ago myself, and we did make some inroads, but I think always changes in personnel and, as you've said, changes in how they are having to practice has actually then influenced their decision making and how they refer in. It's like you don't want them not to refer in, but you would like them to give some consideration actually to what the correct route would be and use their professional judgment to think, sort of effectively. But it's how we can support them with that. One of the things that I would say as well, recently we've identified is an increase of concerns coming from other agencies about West Midlands Ambulance Service, which I think is again reflective of the current situation and is something that we are monitoring as to how the impact of the ambulance services is and what that has on our population who we're working with. So we are monitoring that.
Chair, does this merit a letter from yourself as chair of the committee to Sandwell to say that there does appear to be some concern here about the burden that West Midlands Ambulance Service is putting on the system? Clearly, we want appropriate referrals made, but are they in discussions with West Midlands Ambulance Service in order to improve the situation?
Yeah, I think that'd be a really good idea, and we'll make a note of that and make sure that that's done.
Can I just thank you then for your support around that? I think that would be really helpful. Thank you for the suggestion and thank you for the agreement.
Thank you for that. And again, thank you for the report, and wading through all of the questions obviously generated quite a lot of interest. So we are very grateful for all of the work that's being done. And there's clearly, as I was saying previously, a demonstrable improvement in how we're getting through some of these very challenging referrals. So thank you.
Could I just thank you all for the questions? It's really, really encouraging to hear such insightful and meaningful questions. And, you know, your encouragement over the last few years to me has been really instrumental. So I thank you for that as well.
Thank you very much. Moving on then to item 5, Staffordshire Stoke-on-Trent Adult Safeguarding Partnership Board Annual Report 21-22, which is on page 11. Paul, did you want to open this, or are we going straight?
John Wood, who's the independent chair.
John and Helen, welcome then in that case. And would you be kind enough perhaps to take us through the points of the report?
Thank you, Chairman, and thanks for the invitation to come on this morning. Can I also thank you for your consideration in, we couldn't have had a better warm-up act than having Ruth there with going through what is essentially core business for the Safeguarding Adults Board. And Ruth, don't get any ideas about running off because you might have some more questions before we finish. Chairman, can I also, before I come on to the annual report, I think it would be appropriate to make reference to the response from Staffordshire County Council, because the debate that you've been having as part of this select committee, you won't be surprised to hear, has taken place also at the Safeguarding Board. And the report does actually reference that we have examined reasons for increases in safeguarding concerns. And again, I just want to acknowledge, we've got Joe and Ruth here. It's not a great position when you come along to a safeguarding board amongst all of the partners who sit there and have to talk about some really challenging issues and some resourcing issues as well, which don't necessarily paint or some might perceive it not to be painting Staffordshire County Council in a particularly good light. I mean, I take a completely different view, but the degree of openness and the willingness to wash what is, to lose the colloquial term, dirty linen in public on occasions, I think is really important, and I'd like to think that that is the environment that we create within the Safeguarding Board, you know, where constructive challenge is expected and happens, and we move on and we come out with a positive outcome. And I think you'd agree that that is a positive outcome. So a lot of that discussion that's taken place there has has taken place at the board and at the executive group meetings. And I personally have had one-to-ones with Ruth and Joe, where I've been updated on some of this work. And I think it's really important, given that that paper has just appeared on this board, and given how relevant it is to the safeguarding adults work, I think it is really important to acknowledge that, because we couldn't necessarily, for a variety of reasons, say that about all of the safeguarding partners. And I do recognise that there are lots of competing demands these days on services, but this is clearly an area that's been prioritised, and you can see now the impact of all of that. So I just want to make that point before I go on to the annual report. Can I also say that, given the debate that's taken, or the discussion that's taken place, I suspect that this will curtail some of the business that I'm going to talk through with you in a moment. Okay, so going on to the report then, and again I'm going to move very quickly over some of those safeguarding concerns. I think we've just had a very helpful overview of how all of that works. But I do want to pick up though on paragraph 11 of the report, and it goes back to a question that was asked a little earlier, in terms of, you know, reasons for some of those increases. And I think it's important to just recognise, and Ruth made the point, you know, yes, some of this is driven by the CQC, who will have a particular theme as part of their inspections, etc. And that then does trigger a number of referrals. I think it's important to always be mindful of that, that might be a reason, and be prepared for that, and then things settle down as they seem to have settled down as we come to an agreement as to what needs to be reported and what doesn't. But I also think we need to take account of what is going on nationally, reported in the media, because we also see things that are reported that do have a knock-on effect locally as well. But the important point to pick up on all of this is the willingness always to actually work through those safeguarding concerns once they are reported, in a sense to sort the wheat from the chaff. And it's also important, and Helen does a lot of work around this, about how we raise awareness, you know, through the prevention and engagement group, for example. There are programmes of activity, because we actually know that safeguarding concerns are not reported in all cases. We know there's a high degree of underreporting, and the financial abuse is estimated as anywhere between 10 and 20% is ever reported. So there's always going to be an increase, and we should not be surprised by all of that. But you could take this as that's a healthy sign that the partners are vigilant, that they're working through it. People are not just turning a blind eye to it. You know, we're not lifting a stone and putting it down because we don't like what's underneath. We're actually responding in positive terms. So I think that's really important, and this is where the Safeguarding Adults Board adds value, because it enables those discussions to take place, those constructive challenges to take place, and ultimately to reach some consensus as to how we actually work together, because it is all about working in partnership. None of this is done ever in isolation. Everybody is working together, and that's when it works best. I'll just pick up a couple of the points that I just wanted to... in fact, I've perhaps covered some of these now. I just wanted to make the point again about hidden, which follows on from what I've just been saying, really. That is a theme that we will address through the Safeguarding Board from time to time. We have themed discussions where we actually have a drill down, and we just ensure that, as Ruth alluded, you know, people are moving on all of the time. And if we look at the learning reviews that we conduct, you know, often it's the case that, you know, practitioners are not always as curious as we want them to be, you know, as they need to be. So it's a constant job to remind. And again, I just want to emphasise that that is a really important role of the Safeguarding Board, because to my knowledge, we are the only collective body that actually has that focus and poses those questions and poses those challenges to just remind people of the need to just be vigilant. And again, Ruth's already covered that, as that came into the fore in at the time of COVID and continues. But, Chairman, I think I'm going to pause there because you see the report. I think the value comes from the questions. I think I've just added the points that I wanted to from the discussions that have taken place. I think the value will come from answering any questions, and I'm fortunate I've got a full team here. So hopefully we'll be able to provide answers to anything that you may ask of us. Thank you.
John, thank you for that. Are there any questions obvious to start off with? Yeah. Councillor Wilcox.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you very much, John, for that report. I just wonder if there's a place for us to play as members in all of this, whether or not some of the training that you deliver to your partners is something that possibly could be delivered to us as members as well, because quite often we are visiting residents and sometimes we can spot things that we just wonder, well, I wonder whether that is actually abusive behaviour or whether that doesn't sound quite right. And just going back to the financial position, of course, because of the introduction of all the online banking and digital banking and all the apps and all that sort of stuff that's come to the fore, it has made it particularly easier for people to perpetrate this type of abuse on family members or people they know. And I just wonder then whether, if there is any training that could be offered to us as members, whether that be something that is worth pursuing, going forward.
I will answer that and say absolutely. I think it is absolutely something that we can offer out to you. Either we could do something particular for you to meet your, not your individual needs, but your needs collectively, to look at those particular things that you might find beneficial. There is always a sort of online training, but I don't think you can be a little bit of interactive training where you can ask questions and explore that. As I say, at the moment, we are developing our safeguarding training over the next 12 months. So I would absolutely welcome, any thoughts from yourselves around what that could look like for you. You would be more than welcome to join in some of our sessions that we put on for, with social work staff. If actually coming into a sort of multi-agency group might be beneficial for you to hear the response of others, or if actually particular training around maybe some awareness training around the general principles of safeguarding, then we could do that individually for you as a group and be more than happy to engage with you around that.
Thank you for that. Just a couple of questions then, and you'll be pleased to know I won't rehearse all of the data understanding issues all over again, but I do think that goes through this report. Just on that note, though, for example, if we assume that part of this report, if not its main drive, is to help prevent abuse in the future and give people some idea of how we can do that, then obviously that better understanding of what the problem is important. And if I was just to give an example, it was talking in the report here about people who self-identify as either white or non-white or various other things. And we have a 6% unknown, so 6% of the people either haven't identified or we can't make some form of assessment. And whilst that sounds a small percentage, it's actually quite significant, because if that 6% were to identify as white, then the issues would be proportionate to the population, wouldn't they? So there wouldn't be anything that we could draw from that. However, if that 6% identifies significantly as non-white, then that would mean that there's twice the proportion of that part of our communities that are vulnerable to abuse. So I just wonder whether there is any opportunity for a more sophisticated, if you like, statistical look at what this data is telling us, because it sort of leaves us on that cliff edge, if you don't mind me saying, in as much as you give us these figures and you just need that little bit post that to say, is it a concern or isn't it? In fact, I'll stop there and let you answer that.
want me to take that?
Please, yeah.
Or does Helen might want...
Jump in afterwards to
No.
let you know what we've done.
Why don't you let them know what we've done?
Okay. Very astute. And it's one that we anticipated to come up, actually. For the last couple of years, we've tried really hard to raise the awareness of the importance of accurate data. You've mentioned the importance of data already and about what's significant and what isn't, and that relates to this ethnicity issue. So last year we had a look at it. This year we've had a more focused look at it, and the kind of things that we've done is that we've devised a practitioners forum. So that's 4 practitioners to raise issues with the board, to identify what it is they want to know more about, and then we try to meet their needs. But it's also a two-way conversation where we say, this is also important to us, so we want to raise awareness. So through that practitioners forum, we've raised the importance of ethnicity recording. It is also the agenda, the item on our risk register. Yeah. We have a risk register which currently has 1 risk on it, which is the accuracy of our data with regards to ethnicity recording for the very reasons you've already identified. Because from a prevention point of view, we don't know what we don't know at the moment. I agree with you, 6% I believe is significant. It's higher in Stoke. And also in our newsletter. So we produced biannual, I think that's the right word, twice a year anyway, newsletters. And one of the topics that we chose in the recent newsletter was about this recording. Now, I think there are some challenges to recording from a data perspective as well, which I'll probably, is that okay if I can hand that back to you?
Yeah, so data recording, or it's like a social worker, I don't know, I can never quite put it into words. So we are constantly striving to improve the quality of data that's recorded. And obviously, we've all got our legal obligations under the Data Protection Act and under GDPR. And one of those things is really important, the accuracy of data that we hold about individuals. You know, things like ensuring that your date of birth is correct on somebody's system. All of those sorts of things are actually really important to us as individuals. So it's trying to establish that with our practitioners, making them see this isn't about them as a practitioner having to fill in a box. It's really important that actually the data that we hold is accurate. One of the things I'm really conscious of, though, and I'm sure you can all appreciate it, you know, society changes every day, doesn't it? And it's certainly what feels that way to me, and I've got teenage children, and so sometimes the world seems totally different, and I don't class myself as being that old, but they live in a totally different world. So it's about how our systems update to reflect the needs of our community. So being able to self-identify your gender, being able to self-identify your ethnicity or your religion, us having the ability to then be able to record that accurately on our systems is actually really important. And sometimes our systems don't allow us, or it's worded in a way that makes it seem a little bit difficult. So my view of you as an individual could be very different to the view you hold about yourself. So we need to make it easy for practitioners to know what they should be recording and from what perspective, and have that clearly identified. And I think our systems are moving, but it does seem to be a bit slow. So these are the challenges that we face. But what we are doing is making sure that we update the guidance. So some of my wider work as principal social worker, not just from a safeguarding point of view, is looking at how we can support practitioners and give them the right guidance so that if they're not sure, they've got guidance to go to. And then through our things like we do PSW forums and other avenues, we can then engage with the staff to try and understand that. And the other aspect of that is actually listening to the voice of our communities. And that's something that we need to be doing more. So actually, what's important to our communities? Now, I'm sure in your positions, you've most probably got a much better awareness of that in some ways than we have. So if you ever get some feedback around, you know, that kind of, you know, what's important to people from identifying personal features about them, again, that's something that we need to be able to reflect on to make sure as an organisation we're doing that as effectively as we can. So again, as with all aspects, it's always work to be done, isn't it? We can never just sit there and think, God, we got this sorted. So I think I feel like a broken record when I say it's work in progress, and something that we need to constantly push with our practitioners to help them to understand the importance.
Thank you for that. Now that's I think that's really encouraging, certainly to hear that those sort of issues have already been spotted and work has been done around them. Just following on from that, though, do you think that there is a need? Because when I read through this report, some of it is somewhat siloed, isn't it, into gender, into age, into various other things. Would there be a benefit in some sort of meta-analysis of that? Because if we talk about prevention and being able to spot the signs and do something early to prevent these things happening, for example, is there a next step here? Once you've read it, and when I read through it, if I had to try to identify the most vulnerable people in our society, then would they be over 75-year-old females living in their own home and they're being abused around financial and they identify as non-white? Is that naive? Is it oversimplifying it? Is there some value, though, in having that understanding? Because if we were to make that statement, it then gives people an opportunity to look for the signs in these certain areas. I know we venture into difficult areas then because we start to look at things not dispassionately as perhaps we ought to be doing. But do you think if the objective of this report is to prevent abuse in the future, we need that additional work to be done that paints a picture of where that vulnerability actually lies, rather than in its over 75s. Well, it's not going to be all over 75s, is it? There will be other comorbidities, to quote an NHS phrase. So do we understand that? Is there some value in moving forward with that?
I think the short answer is yes. But it's interesting, Helen reminded me that, well, she reminded all of us, that this question was anticipated today. It's arisen, I don't know how many times we've had a similar question. And I think we need to acknowledge that we're talking here, we have obviously Ruth commenting from a local authority perspective, but we also have other partners who sit around the safeguarding table, and we're looking at this in the round. And I think it would be fair to say that the partners are at different stages in terms of their IT development, their ability to analyse, so that we build up a picture. I think the point that certainly Helen has made and Ruth has made as well is that this is a focus for us. We have the similar discussion when we go to Stoke for their scrutiny. And I think it would be fair to say that we've made progress, but it doesn't always feel as though we've made progress. I think the comment's already been made. There's a lot more to be done on this. And I don't think it's a particularly, it's not a straightforward issue to resolve, but I think the important point is that we keep having the discussion to just keep moving this along. We will move this along incrementally. This will not be big bang and it all moves. This is a discussion that will take place over time. But the more that we can do to raise awareness, and this is a regular feature of the discussions that take place, particularly with practitioners, the more that the penny begins to drop, that people need to be alert to. But we don't put this into one box, and it would be wrong to say it's this or that. We want people to take an open view and to deal with individuals, as individuals, not to try and put them into any sort of box. But we do need to have, though, the facility to be able to, classify for recording purposes, how people identify, so that we are able to conduct the analysis that you talk about, the advanced analysis, as I would call it. And we're not quite at the position to do the advanced analysis because we haven't actually got everyone on the same page at the moment. But I think we'll get there, but it will come down to, iterations of new IT systems and moving together. There's certainly a willingness to do it. I think the technology to catch up and, dare I suggest, the cost of it in some cases is certainly a block in some of the partners. But those that can move forward, we're encouraging to move forward. Those who aren't able, we're just encouraging them to move forward. And like I say, I think in time we will start to see some of that. I don't know if there's any comments, Helen, from?
Yeah, as far as sort of the more tactical response, as you'd expect from me in my role, quite timely, we've got an audit assurance meeting next week and a prevention and engagement meeting, which I chair the week after. I think we've already identified that as a board, we would describe ourselves as maturing. We've been together, well, I've been in post now for 9.5 years, and I've worked with you all that time, and you for most of it, and you for some of it. So we are a maturing board, and we've decided to stretch ourselves this year with regards to our audit and assurance role. We want to be far more challenging within our individual agency analysis and assurance seeking. But you're absolutely spot on in saying that the most vulnerable people in our communities who have care and support needs are females over the age of 65 who live on their own. That was replicated. We've extended some of the membership of our subgroups, and we've got a significantly large housing provider, and they provide to their own board a safeguarding report, and within their own safeguarding report, understanding their housing stock and their residents, they also identify that they're over 65 females who live on their own. So I think that information, now that we've triangulated that, and we will need some more help from performance people, because we are the support team. There's only John, I, and an administrator, so we will be asking for access to performance people to help us with this more demanding and challenging analysis. But I think we now take that information, put it to the prevention and engagement subgroup and say, right, now that we know these people are the more vulnerable, what's the next step?
No, thank you for that. I think that's really encouraging. And just to echo what John's description of maturing, I think, is a really important one. And it's, again, encouraging to hear that that business about the statistics, which is a particular interest of mine, is being recognised and moved forward, because I do think that that will demonstrate some real improvement. Part of this board, well, the sole object of this board really is to hold people to account, hold officers to account. And on that note, would you allow me to be quite blunt with the report and say that when I read through it, there are endless descriptions of individuals who've been helped by a combination of people, and I think that's to be applauded, and thankfully people have got together. But would it be naive of me to think that actually that's what we should be doing anyway? When we hear about John presenting with various issues and a group of people get together and sort his life out, we've had partnership working now for 20 to 30 years. And is there a negative of identifying where the process has worked well as being actually, you know, shouldn't that be the starting point? Shouldn't we not be reading those things? We should expect that John would have had that treatment in any way. And the fact that we've highlighted them, does that say that the overall process then doesn't work particularly well? Therefore, we're having to identify what most of us would expect. I don't want to be blunt, but I do think there is a strategic element in this. We've already accepted that maybe the statistics, the understanding, the prevention could be better. And if what we are showcasing as best practice is what most people would expect, does that say something about where we are?
We welcome blunt, Chairman. We welcome constructive challenge, and thank you for your question. I think it's important to, and you've given us something to reflect on for future editions of the annual report, because what we do, and again, I think it's important to understand the context in which the Safeguarding Board operates. And as Ruth's already taken us through today, you know, we're in the business of receiving safeguarding concerns, which then need to be assessed, evaluated, etc., etc. Now, along the way, we will find good practice and we will find not so good practice. And when we have not so good practice, that is typically in the form of a safeguarding adult review, and we haven't talked about safeguarding adult reviews, although they are referenced in the annual report today. But the core business of the board is around what we learn when situations have gone wrong. And that is a requirement for us to report back on the work that we do with safeguarding adult reviews. We also do other learning reviews under the auspices of the board. They're not necessarily safeguarding adult reviews. We could conduct literally all sorts of reviews that we can ask partners to report on, and we do from time to time. So I think it's important to put your question or your sort of comment into a context that's how we operate. And what we do as part of the annual report, and have been doing now for certainly a few years, is to try to give a picture of what adult safeguarding is. Because when we do have awareness raising sessions, people don't always know, can't always recognise what a safeguarding concern is. And yes, there will be, and I go back to my comment, sometimes we'll get it right and sometimes we won't. More often than not, when they referred into safeguarding, the situations that have gone wrong. So what we're doing in a sense, and again, if you appreciate the readership of this annual report, we want it to go out to practitioners, we want it to go out to anybody really, and I might make a plug for the website before I've finished today, because that's where a lot of the information that the Safeguarding Board has is made visible, and we do have something like 3,000 visitors per month to the site. This is really about how we present a balanced picture through our annual report. This is our shop. This is the Safeguarding Board's shop window, and this report is larger, in length than many others up and down the country. Some we know we've got probably 10 or a dozen pages. So personally, I don't subscribe to that. I think it's important that what we do is visible, transparent. You can see it. We come along here today. We're happy to answer questions that you might have. That's the way that this should work from my perspective. And the case studies are a balance. And again, I'm grateful for the opportunity to be able to answer your comment question, to put that into, as to why we actually do it in that way. But we do look at the presentation of the annual report from time to time. I mean, the feedback normally on case studies has been very positive, because people, people do see that there is an opportunity, because the tendency can be that we're all doom and gloom, because that's the nature of a lot of, the work that comes across. Well, I'm speaking for Ruth now and the team. That's the business that they're involved in, and what we're basically doing is saying to people, when we get it right, these are examples of when we get it right. Let's aspire to do more of what's right, rather than reacting to the things when they've got wrong. And it's a challenge, quite honestly. But that's the reason for the balance. And as I say, normally we have a very positive response to the case studies, because people like to see. And there's also some acknowledgement, Chairman, for the good work that the teams are doing. And again, we know that goes down well, and what's much more motivating than a thank you and a recognition that we've done some really good work. And I think there's 8 cases out of about 13, 14,000. It's a relatively small number, but it's a balance.
No, thank you for that. That's really helpful. Councillor McMahon.
There's a missing link for me in this, and the same applies to children. And that's online abuse and the safeguarding of adults who are trolled and life is made difficult for them online. And from my point of view, that's part of the unknown, the hidden agenda. But I really think that it ought to be part of the prevention process for you guys, and to have a look at that. We don't know how big it is. In all probability, it's really quite big. And some people have a wretched time as a result. And if it falls anywhere in the public services, I would have thought it falls with safeguarding, and perhaps even with the police, but certainly with safeguarding. It's all to do with education, I think. But I do think that is part of your remit, and I don't see that in this annual report.
I think I've been nominated to take this point. So you're absolutely right. It is something that actually is recognised. Although it's not a form on its own, it comes under either emotional abuse, financial, or depending on what the nature of the interaction is online. We have quite a proportion under the financial abuse of online dating scams, which works where we work alongside police and their particular part of the police that looks at some of those elements. It is training that we've given locally to our safeguarding teams around recognising online abuse, and regionally it's something that we've updated lately in the procedures and practice guidance around the recognition of online abuse and the forms that can take. It was actually first recognised sort of 6 years ago, I think, when I sort of first started, and is something that actually has then become much more part, and I am going to say this, of our practice. It is a recognised thing, certainly within social work, that this is absolutely an area of abuse, and looking at how we can support people. Now, I can't speak for my children's colleagues, but I do understand, just from my own experience of my children, that actually children now are getting more support within schools around recognising when they're at risk of online abuse, which hopefully going forward will then support people. Obviously, for some of our older generation, and my grandma knows that I mentioned this, my grandma was victim of online abuse, and actually for her she didn't recognise it at all because actually she wasn't used to being online, and I think it's around the right education. And I think that is most probably something that is out there. It might be something that needs to be looked at more, but my awareness of that and my awareness of some of our voluntary agencies, such as, sort of Age Concern, Age UK, etc., actually there is a greater recognition of that for some of our other generations as well. But you're absolutely right that we do need to be identifying that more, because I think it's quite often hidden in the other categories of abuse, if that makes sense. Because as you know, the Care Act defines how we categorise abuse, and online forms, a subsection of all of those. So yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. That's really helpful. From my point of view, it's a different order of complexity for a start, and therefore it's harder to challenge. It crosses most probably. From an age perspective, from a demographic perspective, it's most probably a far wider spectrum than the over 65 white female living on her own. And therefore, it would be easy to lose track of that if we weren't on it. And I just think it ought to be something that is in the report in its own right, because of the challenges involved.
I would recognise we have a slight challenge with that, with the way that we record our information, because we only record under the category of abuse, so we have to then interrogate individual inquiries. What we could look at doing is seeing as to whether we could identify case studies, which we could then bring to the board, and that could be something that we look at doing. But from a data perspective, it actually gets quite difficult. Care Director doesn't allow us to record that specifically, to be able to then interrogate the data. And it is something that we speak about in all aspects. It's a little bit like if you think about domestic abuse. Domestic abuse can take many different forms, and so it could be primarily recorded as domestic abuse, but then your subsection under that could be financial abuse or could be physical, sexual, or one of the other categories. And whilst we identify that in reports, and it's clear if you look at individual reports that all of that has been covered, actually from a data performance perspective, that's where we do struggle, and that I have to be honest about that. I'm not saying it's right, I'm saying that's the position we're in. Does that?
Ruth, I'm going to add it to the audit and assurance agenda for next Thursday to identify how our partner agencies can help us, because obviously without the data, you've just said that, that's the first point. We need to get that reliable data. So I'll put it on the agenda for audit assurance next week, and we'll ask our partner agencies how they could, and that will include the police, to see if they could at least give us a leg up on that. They may record differently, which would support us to start some work. Thank you.
That's a pleasure. It may be something to mention to Care Director in terms of the next update.
Chairman, if I can just add, Councillor McMahon has made a good point about the case study. That might be an avenue that we could explore, because, again, it's important that the annual report is able to convey the messages that we want to convey. And again, it is a hidden aspect. So I think we ought to look at ways to which we have it reflected appropriately, but within the constraints of our collection methods.
Thank you for that. I think that's really encouraging. Just one thing I would add to that. I know that policing in a regional forum and also the Home Office have made this distinction recently between cyber-enabled and cyber-dependent crimes. You know, without going into the definitions, I'm sure you can work that out. There is a West Midlands cybercrime unit, actually, who may well have most of the answers and the data that you're looking for around some of this. So rather than reinventing the wheel, could I suggest that maybe a visit by the West Midlands Cybercrime Unit might be advantageous? Thank you.
Could I just add to that we find the police find it very difficult to identify care and support needs. Their thrust is vulnerability, which is, as you know, is very different to care and support needs. So whereas they're very willing to help us with quantitative analysis, their systems are not set up yet for care and support needs. But there's no harm in us having a look, and I'll, like I say, include that in the agenda item next week. We can report back.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to extend it, but also what almost a bit of the Al Capone effect really here. But with the police, there is the Misuse of Computers Act, which is used quite extensively now. If we suspect, or listen to me for we, if the police suspect that there is online abuse, then rather than trying to tackle all of those issues, there's some very simple fixes around sections 1, 2 and 3 of the Computer Misuse Act. So, thank you for that. Just one final question you'll be glad to hear from me. We still have this disparity between Stoke-on-Trent and Staffordshire about referrals. I think it was mentioned in last year's report. It talks in the report about trying to identify why, and I think there's a promise to the future around how we're going to do that. Do we have to wait another 12 months? Is it something, are there lessons that could be learned on both sides? Thank you.
So I almost thought I was going to get away without having to answer this question for the 4th year in a row. No, I think that is just the reflection of where we've been. But I did meet with Stoke just in the week leading up to Christmas with the safeguarding leads and principal social worker as well over at Stoke-on-Trent to talk about this very thing. It is actually an element of it is recording, it is where we record things, but there's also almost that interpretation, which, as we said before, is reflective across the country. We find it really difficult, and we've done some quite extensive reviews over what we've done, and we're both quite sure that the way we record is the right way. So that is my honest representation, and I don't think that we need to change in Staffordshire, is my honest view around how we record and at what point we record something as being a safeguarding concern, what point we record it being at section 42. We don't sit outside of any national known, although we have always previously been at the higher end and we will still remain there. It's not actually we're not as much of an outlier as we used to be. And as well, for me, it's sometimes we have to recognise and appreciate our differences, and that's not necessarily a bad thing.
No, thank you. I think that's really reassuring. Again, providing that we've recognised it and looked at it and are happy that our processes are right, then I do think we can probably put that to rest then, can't we? You know, it isn't something we need to pursue. It's just that year after year, there's that glaring discrepancy of one being twice as much as the other. You know, are we overdoing it? Are they underdoing it? Trying to make sure that we get that right. If that's been looked at and we have an assurance that our processes are right, then I think that's hugely encouraging on its own. Are there any other questions? No? I'll finish there then. Just what I would say is, despite my criticisms about putting in various bits and pieces, I do think reading through that provides a real sense of reassurance. A bit of a warm blanket, isn't it, when you read how the processes come together and we can make a difference in some very vulnerable people's lives, particularly when you read some of the policing figures, which thankfully are small, but we're talking a quarter of those people being physically abused and even raped. I think we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that there are some incredibly serious issues around abuse of adults, abuse being bad enough in itself. I think the report is really well written. Thank you for bringing it. And I think the answer to the questions were really encouraging, and thank you for all the hard work and the recognition about that maturing process and where we're going in the future. So Helen and John, thank you. John, I think you want to make a point.
Thank you for that summing up, Chairman. I just want to thank on behalf of colleagues I've come along with today for your questions and for receiving us. This is undoubtedly an important diary appointment in our annual calendar where we come along. We expect to be questioned on the report, and we've not been disappointed. We've had quite a considerable chunk of your time today, and we're really grateful for that. It really is important. There are occasions, sometimes when we go along and there's little or no questioning, that to me is not what scrutiny is about. So I just want to pick up your comment again, Chairman, about criticism, because the remarks you made are not criticisms as far as I'm concerned, and I'm sure those sitting alongside me would say also that is not a criticism. That is an observation that you make. At best, I would say, well, that's a constructive challenge. We're explaining why we do what we do, the purpose of it, etc. And that is absolutely fine. We do not talk in safeguarding adult board terms of criticism. We talk about constructive discussions to talk through the whatever the issue might be, and to come up with an outcome that we're all satisfied with at the end of the day. Well, that's always the aim anyway. Sometimes we can do that, sometimes we can't. So I'll just conclude there by thank you again for your time, and we look forward to the next annual report, which is, Helen won't thank me for saying this, but we'll be planning that before very long. It's always a joyful time.
Thank you for that. That's very kind of you. I think it's been a really useful session. We'll move on. If people are leaving, do we want to take 2 minutes to get a coffee and... Sorry, Councillor Wilcox, did you want to say something before we go?
Just a quick suggestion to John in writing the annual report. I wonder whether it might be useful to have a summary sheet at the beginning, giving the key findings in that report, perhaps just summarised on one sheet rather than having to go, whilst we want the full report, just a key summary maybe just of the key items that have been identified during the year in that report as a part of the forward.
Chairman, we do produce the cover report for the committee, and then I think it'd be very difficult actually to take out. I mean, on the performance section, we have a cover sheet with the key headline data. We can look at how we produce that. Helen, what about the version, the easy read version that we do through Roxburgh? Is that something?
No,
Right.
I wouldn't recommend that in this audience. No, that's very much a targeted audience. Yeah. Sorry.
If there's any particular aspects, I mean, again, we do produce the cover report for the committee. If there's any gaps in the cover report that we could specifically add, the danger is we then start rewriting the report. The expectation is the annual report is there, it's to be read, and a bit like today, we've stimulated a good discussion, and that's, to me, is what scrutiny is about.
Yeah, thank you for that. Maybe it's something we need to take outside and identify what we would like and see if that can be achieved, rather than ask you to do it. But that's great. Thank you very much. I think everyone's back. I think we'll make a start. If we move on then to item 6, Staffordshire Safeguarding Children's Board annual report on page 63. Is it Ian? Is it Vinell? Is it Ian? Perhaps you could take us through it.
Thank you. Just important probably for the committee to understand the role that I have, which is slightly different from the role that John has as the chair of the adult board. And actually, probably from the person that last presented an annual report to this committee, just to kind of understand the role that I have in that context. So my introduction to the committee was independent chair and scrutineer of the Staffordshire Safeguarding Children Board. And that additional terminology around scrutineer is important for you to know, because I provide independent scrutiny in that role and act as a critical friend to the Safeguarding Partnership. And obviously promote some reflections in the partnership, ensuring that we're driving improvement. And I think my role is to provide assurance in judging the effectiveness of multi-agency safeguarding arrangements for children in Staffordshire. So it's slightly different in relation to the role that John has as chairing the board, because my role is also, and probably I'd say primarily scrutiny. And I will talk to you a little bit about that in a moment. One of the things that's important from my perspective in that relation to scrutiny is to trace a line between frontline practice and the board to ensure that there is something that there's a good understanding about outcomes for children and young people, but in that context ensuring that the board partners there's a line of sight in relation to operational practice. So part of my scrutiny role, and I will talk to you a little bit about some of the areas that I am focusing on, which is related to the report as well, in a second. One of the things that I'm quite keen to do is I can review services. I can go and look at services. I can understand their functions and responsibilities. What I'm more keen on is understanding the outcomes for children and young people as a result of those services and support services available. And I think one of the things that it's important from my perspective is that I can understand the way in which the safeguarding system works, but I want to understand what impact it's having in relation to individual children and young people. In that context, the voice of the child, from my perspective, is crucial. And I know it's a board priority, and I want us as a board partnership to ensure that we get the voices of children and young people focused on that particular area of practice. One of the things I wanted to highlight to the committee, which I think is a very positive outcome, is the inaugural meeting of the chairs of the Health and Wellbeing Board, the Child Safeguarding Board and the Adult Board, alongside Community Safety Forum, and hopefully the strategic lead from the ICB. It's reflected, I think, in the report in terms of the partnership protocol, because I think, from my perspective, and joining the board arrangements in June last year, so I've been in post just over 6 months. Important to highlight the opportunities that we should have to look at our shared priorities and understand that we've all got a responsibility to safeguard and promote the welfare of residents in Staffordshire, not just in relation to children and young people. And the inaugural meeting took place of that group in November. And actually, I think that's a really good opportunity, particularly around shared priorities and thinking about how we can work together to effectively promote the welfare of children, young people and adults in that perspective. And one of the things that's not mentioned in the report, which I think is important part of conversation is around transitional safeguarding. So those children and young people that are reaching the ages of 18, and how we ensure that we work together to ensure the effectiveness of those children and young people being transferred into adult social care. In relation to the report, you'll see obviously the priorities that we have in terms of neglect continues to be a focus in relation to the board priority. The implementation of the graded care profile, which is referenced in the report, I think has presented some challenges in terms of the numbers of assessments that have been undertaken. There's been a lot of people trained in the framework, but I think it's not reflected then in the numbers of assessments that have been undertaken with families as a result. So it's one of the areas that I've decided to scrutinise in a bit more detail in the new year, because that sense of, if you have a tool that is used to effectively assess children in those circumstances, we need to make sure that it's effective and that it's being used by practitioners across the safeguarding system. And as I said, it's a challenge to think we've had over 900 practitioners trained in this approach across Staffordshire, but only, I think, 70 plus assessments undertaken in that time frame. One of the things that I've challenged the board over is the issue about the fact that neglect is a much more of a cultural issue in terms of organisational culture, and actually ensuring that practitioners and agencies at all levels understand the impact on children and young people of neglect, and not necessarily focus in on an assessment tool that assesses those needs. In relation to the voice of the child, I've mentioned, I think it's a board priority that we need to improve. I would like to have a lot more understanding of children's stories that reach the board partners. I'm very keen for them to understand, from my perspective, that they have a role in ensuring that there is, as I say, a kind of an oversight and an eye on frontline practice. And that can only be seen sometimes with children's stories. And I'm very aware of some young people where they've presented challenges to the police, to health and to children's social care across the piece, both financially and emotionally for those children and young people. And I think it's the board's role to understand the needs of some of those children, because they sometimes reflect the safeguarding system that exists at the moment. One of the things that I feel is possibly not reflected in the report as much as it should is in relation to schools and their role. I have engaged with the head teachers of the primary phase and the secondary phase because I feel very strongly that they are a key partner in relation to our safeguarding responsibilities. They are not a statutory partner yet. Obviously, the statutory partners are the local authority, the police and the ICB, but they clearly have a role to play in relation to the safeguarding of children and young people, but they are not represented at board level in terms of their current position. I think there's some work to be done in relation to how we engage those schools. Obviously, it's very difficult because you can't have one school representing the school population across the county. But I'm keen to improve that working relationship. You'll see reference in the report there to the multi-agency safeguarding hub, which is the MASH. Councillors may be aware that we have decided to separate the MASH in recent weeks from Stoke-on-Trent. Up until recently, the MASH was a joint Stoke-on-Trent, Staffordshire multi-agency safeguarding hub. But after consideration with Stoke-on-Trent and the board ourselves, it was agreed that there is a need to separate those arrangements, and that process is happening as it stands at the moment. I've just done a piece of scrutiny work in relation to the MASH because I think it's a key part of multi-agency practice. Obviously, you have teams based at Lindham House in Stone, from the police, children's social care, and from health. And I've done a piece of work to understand how effectively that's working currently. And I think there's some more work to do, which will link to the progress in relation to the separation of those arrangements in the future. The report reflects, I think, in terms of some of the challenges around some of the transformation arrangements that are happening in the police, social care, and in health. And one of the things that obviously I've come to the board relatively late, but one of the things I would reflect on is being on the front foot in relation to some of those things. You'll be aware, obviously, of Staffordshire Police inspection in relation to safeguarding in September 21, which was pretty negative. Obviously, there's some other issues that have been raised in relation to the changes in children's social care and health. And one of the things that I'm keen to ensure is that, as part of my role, is to ensure that the safeguarding arrangements are not affected by some of those quite significant changes, and the impact on, particularly on children and young people, of those changes in those arrangements. The committee will be aware of the comments in the report around safeguarding practice reviews. Just to be clear, local child safeguarding practice reviews are where children have died or have been seriously injured. And there is a list in that report of some of the issues that has raised in relation to practice. And one of the things that I think is my role is to seek some assurance about how that learning is impacting on individual practitioners and frontline practice. Because I think that some of those issues are clearly things that we need to focus on in terms of practice and good practice, but also some issues around, making sure that we get the basics right in some respects in terms of some of the issues it raises. And part of that, obviously, is the training and development and the learning part of the role of the board, and ensuring that we're clear about how that is influencing and impacting the system. I will be looking at doing some work with the board partners in relation to the impact of the learning and development programme that's developed by the board, particularly in relation to the areas that I've mentioned in terms of safeguarding practice reviews. The other issue that's highlighted in the report is in relation to Warrington, which obviously is a youth offending institution in Staffordshire. And you'll be aware, obviously, that the local authority and the safeguarding board has a responsibility in relation to ensuring those children and young people are safeguarded in Warrington. And there has been some concerns raised, as you may or may not know, in relation to the inspection report of Warrington. And again, at that point, it's those sorts of issues that I think the board needs to be on the front foot in terms of knowing beforehand that some of those issues are presenting themselves. In relation to the other areas, obviously child exploitation and serious youth violence is referenced in the report. I think the issues around that are being worked through with a joint Stoke and Staffordshire subgroup in relation to child exploitation. And one of the things that I note from the report in relation to information is the data that kind of reflects that. And it may be appropriate at some point, and after reflecting on some of the conversations had earlier about ensuring that councillors had a bit more information in relation to the data that reflects some of the report findings. So that's probably my summary, if that's okay.
Ian, thank you for that. That's really useful. I'm just looking if there's any immediate questions. Yep. Oh, excuse me. Sorry, Janet, I think you wanted to ask a question.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, thank you very much for that update. I, along with several other councillors, sit on the Child Prevention Committee. and therefore it sort of overlaps with what you've had to say today. I'm very disappointed, and perhaps you can assure me, that MASH has decided to separate. My recollection of visiting MASH was an agency of all people regarding health, police and everything, all under one roof, and it was given to me as a backup service to go alongside with our health, children's health looking after here. So I'm disappointed that that's happened. Perhaps you could assure me. I've got a couple of other questions, Chair. The other thing is about children in schools. I'd like to know if you're making any involvement with taking into partnership with the schools that have got teachers there or people in the school that will take on this responsibility. They are aware of what the children's dangerous periods are, dangerous times where they're homecoming, when they come to school late. They have a mind of information that you might find interesting there, which will be another prevention. There's child grooming as well, as it's always already been mentioned earlier in another meeting, of child grooming, of children being coerced into doing things online, as well as being visited by people. So, and the other, lastly, Chairman, is I sit on, as a councillor to the Family Involvement Board, which deals with pregnant mothers. There's one in every district, and every county councillor has a position on that board. I represent the one in Lichfield. And what I learn from that, I make sure my other councillors that in the division of Lichfield, they get to know about the important factors of that meeting. And it doesn't always happen to children that are able to talk to you about their problems. These people are young girls that get pregnant, and they have a psychological problem as well. And I wondered if you've got any ideas about that I could take to this board to say that you are looking at it, and we are happy with the scrutiny that's going on. I think that's it. Thank you, Chair.
Just in relation to the MASH, first and foremost, the arrangements would remain the same. So the separation effectively is Stoke has already moved out of the building in terms of Lindham House and are currently virtual. And the decision that was taken by the Children's Safeguarding Board in Stoke-on-Trent and in Staffordshire was to separate out the Safeguarding Board, the MASH arrangements for those two of local authorities. I think that was a conscious decision by the Director of Children's Services to ensure that the focus could be on Staffordshire and then the focus could be on Stoke-on-Trent. But the partners, the police, health, children's social care remain the same. So there should be no changes in relation to practice as a result of that. I share your view about schools, and I think, as I said in my introduction, I think we have an opportunity, I think, to work alongside colleagues in the school population. I am invited to the Phase Leads meeting as the chair of the Safeguarding Children's Board to engage them about how we can progress some of the things that you've highlighted. And I think it's important, as I said, because they're a key partner in relation to the work that we're doing. The child grooming and online harm issues that were raised by yourself and earlier, obviously there is the child exploitation task group of the board, which currently is looking at not only children who have been exploited criminally but also sexually, and that group is working proactively to identify appropriate support and services to those children and young people. In relation to pregnancy, and I think you related to teenage pregnancy in particular. I don't have the data in relation to that, I'm afraid, and I think possibly that's something that I can go away and have a bit more focus on with the ICB in relation to understanding that picture. So I'll take that back as an action to just understand the issues in relation to teenage pregnancy, just to provide you then perhaps with some follow-up after that.
Thank you very much for that. I'm very pleased to hear that MASH is going to continue to help this situation. Very pleased to hear about the family involvement in the teenage pregnancies. Yes, that's good. Child grooming, yeah, that's fine. I just concerned now about the two things you've just mentioned. One about the special board, a grooming board that sits and looks after people, looks after things like this. I wondered if we could have perhaps them along to have a look at the scrutiny of what they're doing and get some understanding of that, Chair, if that's possible.
Yeah, I think we can certainly look at that. I know Helen's made a note, so we'll certainly consider that. Yeah.
Thank you very much for that report. Thank you.
Councillor Pardeshi, I think you were next.
Thank you, Chair. If I could just make 2 quick points now and then come back with 2 later, Chair. Whenever, sadly, we have a case of a child who has died through abuse or has been seriously harmed, we can almost guarantee there's going to be something in there about ineffective information sharing. And I don't understand, to put it bluntly, what is difficult about information sharing when we're living in a time when that's probably more easy now than at any other time. I'd appreciate if you could help me understand that. And secondly, Chair, my other point is that I hope that we'll all agree that when we are addressed with issues of children missing school regularly and are then vulnerable to exploitation and so on, that ideally all our schools should have the time and resources to prevent prevent that child from going regularly missing and be vulnerable to these issues. There's a lot of preventative work that can happen in schools there as long as they have the resources. And it also is a reflection on, I don't expect you to comment on this, it's also a reflection of where our youth services are at. Young people are saying that they want things to do and places to go, and places like youth centres and youth workers have always been very good at identifying issues that young people are affected by before they become major concerns. Thank you, Chair.
I think it's really difficult to answer the question around information sharing, because the frustrations that you feel probably are felt by professionals and practitioners across the system. I think there is that the culture of that actually when you have a vulnerable child, and there are circumstances in which that child is that vulnerability is increased, requires agencies and practitioners to share appropriate information. That does happen effectively at the MASH. I've observed that for myself in relation to that process. I think we are talking much more about those children that don't possibly meet the threshold for statutory services. Mm-hmm. And I think that those children present a challenge because obviously in most circumstances we ask for consent in those situations. Mm. And if consent is refused, we have or local authorities and practitioners have no options other than to withdraw in those circumstances, which I think is a real challenge. Mm-hmm. Our statutory responsibilities under the Children Act 1989 mean that there is appropriate information sharing for those children who meet a certain threshold. and that will always happen. I think it's for those children that don't meet those thresholds that become more problematic. And to be honest with you, that's more children than reach that threshold for statutory intervention. I think there are mechanisms that are being developed in Staffordshire to achieve that through the local district hubs, which I think probably councillors are aware of in terms of the arrangements for children's social care. I've had some very positive conversations with colleagues in a couple of the districts where there's some really positive information sharing happening appropriately to safeguard children and young people. I also don't think that virtual working has helped because from experience, you know, when you are working in this field, you know, you would come across and have regular contact possibly with people that you can have conversations with about individual children and young people, appropriately sharing information to ensure that you get the right support and services to them at the right time. I do think at times practitioners are stuck in the world of GDPR and those things, but I've always felt quite strongly that I don't think any practitioner has ever been prosecuted for sharing information appropriately. As long as they record that information, as long as they are clear about why they're sharing that information and it is appropriately recorded, I can't see any reasons why people can't do that. I think it does become a real challenge when you see those issues arising. In relation to missing children, we do have data that's shared with the board and the partnership around children who go missing. I've got the most recent figures in relation to Q2, which indicates a decrease in the numbers of children that go missing at the moment. But equally, you know as well as I do, as a result of going missing or going missing from school, they are highly likely to be vulnerable young people that then potentially are likely to be exploited and so on and so forth. So missing education is a key area of concern that obviously I want to have those conversations with school leaders around.
Sorry.
Thank you for that. Councillor Perry, I think you were next.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chairman. Thank you for the report. Mine's actually with what you said about working with schools and knowing what schools are about. There was a piece of work done, I think it was last year. I was party to that with another councillor, with a lot of interested partners in the council chamber. Ellen will probably be able to tell you what it was called. Just to say that we did have a lot of schools in there. We did this piece of work, so there is already some information there that you might like to take a look at when you're negotiating with schools and what they're doing and what they're about when it comes to safeguarding within the schools with children. Just thought it might be worth mentioning. So, Ellen, can you remind me what it was, please?
Yeah, we did an inquiry day on sexual harassment in schools, and your predecessor attended, actually, and so did Lynn.
Maybe you could take a look at that and see where we're at with the schools, because it was well supported by the schools, if I'm being honest. And there was different bodies there that sort of answered lots of questions that we put to them. So maybe you could take a look at that. Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that. Councillor Wilcox, I think you wanted to.
Thank you, Chair. Just going back to something that Councillor Pardesi said in relation to information sharing. I noticed under the MASH heading you talk about that you're looking to replace the current system and that workshops have gone on, etc. And also in that paragraph it talks about some recruitment gaps. And I just wondered, do you have a timescale to when you think you're going to have this new information sharing system up and running and in place? Because clearly it's vitally important that if we're not having the right information and it's not shared correctly, we're going backwards as opposed to going forward in making sure we're not missing any opportunities or missing, more importantly, children that are not being sort of looked after properly. So I just wondered if there's any timescales involved in actually bringing that forward. That's
a very helpful point to raise. obviously the accountable authorities for that are our police, children's social care and health. There has been conversations. There is currently a system that's been in place in the MASH called the Information Sharing Log since, I think, 2010. It's no longer fit for purpose. It's a system that is supported by Staffordshire County Council, but having reviewed it myself, it's no longer, given the arrangements that are in place, it's no longer fit for purpose. There are options that are being explored currently in relation to looking at a different system. There are systems I understand within, and this, excuse my naivety about this, but there are systems I understand in Staffordshire County Council that could meet some of the requirements that are needed in the MASH. Something called FIDO. I haven't come across that before, but I did have a presentation before Christmas on that issue. But certainly I understand that there are some options that are available. But I think in terms of timescales, that has to be a priority over the next 6 to 12 months.
Thank you for that. Well, another one?
The only comment I would make, Mr. Chairman, I think 6 to 12 months seems, almost far too long. If there's any piece of work that needs to be prioritised as far as the board concerned, I think that is certainly one area that needs to be absolutely prioritised in order to get in place early enough so that we capture all. And I think leaving it 12 months and us coming back in 12 months' time and saying, actually, where are we now with this? If we haven't moved forward, then I think we've missed a golden opportunity to put in place exactly all the mechanisms you need to have a really up-to-date information sharing system that everyone can be brought into.
Thank you. Do you want to reply to that, Ian, or not?
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. I think the challenge is in relation to cost and system change and all of the issues that it raises about transferring one system to another. But I totally respect the point about the time frame that you've referenced there.
Thank you. Councillor Mahon.
As in the adult report, I want to make reference to online harm. I think it's a huge issue for kids. And I would like some assurance that you as a board are assured that all is being done to mitigate that harm. Particularly when the board sees neglect as a priority, because parental neglect makes it easier for bad actors to troll and to groom youngsters. In the we've already this is the extreme end, granted, but I think it just puts it into relief the risks that are involved. We've already had somebody who's been radicalised who lived in Staffordshire, lived in Stoke, and ultimately lived just a few yards from here before he committed the terrorist atrocity in Fishmonger's Hall. Just this last week, we heard about Rhiannon Rudd. The girl was only 16. She committed suicide after being charged with terrorist offences. She was groomed online. She was groomed by an American extremist called Christopher Cook and a white supremacist called Dax Malaburn. Now, the reason I mention that in particular is that these bad actors weren't confined to Staffordshire. They could be anywhere in the globe, which makes the thing very complicated. I know that for some time now, the security services had seen grooming as a step towards radicalisation. They have a designated person for that. There is a 70-page document that was co-written by the gentleman that was the technical director for at the National Cybersecurity Agency and the current director of cryptoanalysis at GCHQ, highlighting the need to protect children online because it's a national security risk. So we go from that order of risk right down to less egregious risk. And we don't know the numbers involved. And it's a huge don't know what we don't know here. And I would like your understanding of where you want to go with this and how you can assure us in the future about what's been done. Now, it strikes me there's a couple of things that can be done. The first is children's education. What are the schools doing? What are they using? And out of this meeting, I can discuss with you, because I'm quite close to this, agencies that would be able to help. I would draw your attention in particular to Beban Kidron's 5 Rights campaign. Kidron is a Lord's backbencher, Baroness Kidron. In a previous life, she was a film director. Oranges Are Not the Only Hanging Fruit and Bridget Jones' The Edge of Reason are 2 of her films. And she sees that children need 5 rights online in order to be properly protected. And I would very much like to see Staffordshire adopt those 5 rights on behalf of children and really champion them. I leave it open to you to respond to us. And Chair, if need be, I would, if you agree, I would like to see some sort of update on what progress is being made in this regard. We've already had Cairn. We don't want another one. We certainly don't want Rhiannon Rudd, and we want to do something about the epidemic of mental health issues for children, which is clearly, the evidence is there, it's clearly related to online use and online harm. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Ian, do you have a view?
I think probably in relation, I'm very happy to take this back to the board partners as an area of concern raised from this conversation today. I picked it up from the adult discussion, and actually I think it's right and proper that we explore some of those issues as part of the oversight in relation to scrutiny of children and young people and concerns that there are for them. I haven't seen the 5 rights, but I will certainly do some research on that and present that to the board partners. I mean, that is something quite tangible, and actually feels possibly a strengthening of the arrangements that are currently in place. I'm more than happy to support the child exploitation subgroup chair to consider coming to the committee in future to ensure that those issues can also be captured and scrutinised through that route as well.
Thank you for that. Just on that quick point, I thought all local authorities had signed up to the European Convention on the Rights of the Child. Would that not encapsulate the 5 points that we were already talking about?
If they are specific to online grooming, I think probably that's the. As I say, I haven't seen them, but my assumptions are they are specific to online harm.
The rights are things that aren't in place at the moment. It's things like knowing who you're speaking to is one. The other one that comes to mind is a youngster ought to be able to take down what they've put up because they did something impulsively in their adolescence. They've got to live with it for the rest of their lives. It's issues like that.
I think Janet Eagland, I think you were indicated next.
No, I was just signalling to say that you'd already agreed that we would have this special board coming forward about grooming, and it would include what John has just said. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. We'll do that. Councillor Warman.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a couple of questions. It just builds on Johnny's point that he's just raised. Johnny was talking about, and he mentioned emotional and behavioural difficulties, and I think coming out of COVID, a lot of young people, and especially younger people, may not have had as much social interaction, may be concerned about further social interaction being at school and so on. It's not strictly safeguarding, but does the board have any view or discuss emotional and behavioural difficulties at all? And I think one of the things it feels to me is that joined up across the partners? Because obviously we've got the NHS might have a role in that from a mental health point of view. Obviously the County Council will have. What's your view? Thank you.
I think that's a very helpful question. One of the things that I'm encouraging the board partners to do is to, as I said, have some opportunities to have some children's stories presented to the board, because I think it reflects the safeguarding system. I'm aware of some really challenging young people who have significant emotional and behavioural difficulties and challenges that are challenging all of those strategic partners in terms of placement, in terms of where they live, in terms of where they're cared for, in terms of the services and support that they're receiving. I do see the board partners as being unblockers. That's their role as strategic leaders, to ensure that some of those children and young people get the effective services that they need. And I can reassure that, I can assure councillors today that certainly we discuss the issues, for example, around the challenges for children and young people with behavioural and emotional difficulties in terms of CAM support and other support arrangements in place. I think there are, as I say, there's an opportunity, I think, to develop that further with the board partners, in so, as I say, ensuring that we learn more about children's experiences. I do think, whilst they are strategic leaders, they need to understand what life is like for individual children in those circumstances, because they're ultimately accountable for them. So I think it's important that we have those discussions and conversations. In relation to the board arrangements, what we seek is reports from and updates from agencies and services, and there is no reasons why we can't seek further assurances from colleagues within services around how those needs are being met across the piece.
Thanks, Joe. If I can just come in, because I am aware, so for Shropshire Council, for example, if I'm getting the right terminology, the ICB, Integrated Care Board, they are working with the local authority around emotional and behavioural difficulties, and they're putting quite a bit of support in. And they're working with the early help teams with children's social care. It's that sort of kind of partnership working. The question is, are we doing that in Staffordshire? Are we thinking about it? Does the board have a role to play? I appreciate this might not be you might not be the right person to aim this question at, but it does feel to me, knowing the kind of situation on the ground, are we offering a proper partnership approach to that issue, which seems to be increasing over time? I don't know. It might be something that we might want to consider at a future meeting, I suppose. In terms of other questions, two kind of pointed ones, quite specific. The working from home issue worries me slightly. Clearly we went from a situation where not many people work from home to a situation where most of us, or at least in local authorities and in professional organisations, do work from home. I work majority from home now, I never used to. And that creates challenges, perhaps more so in safeguarding situations where kind of discussions and so on that might be had may not be being had anymore because people don't want to write on the instant messaging service or write it via email. Those chats may be going by the wayside. What's the board's view on that? And do you think that we need to be changing the way we're doing things at the moment, or do you think it's quite right at the moment?
There's some fascinating and will be some fascinating research that comes out about some of the issues that this is raising for safeguarding partners, I think, because there is an argument that as a result of virtual working there is more engagement from partners, possibly more than there was previously, because of the virtual nature of the arrangements, that people can be at meetings perhaps that they weren't previously because they were travelling. I think the disadvantage is the relationships that people build, and if you're working in partnership with colleagues, sometimes it's more challenging to do that on a virtual basis rather than face-to-face. And I think that does present some challenges. I'm not aware in Staffordshire that the arrangements that were put in place for COVID remain. So in that sense, children are being visited and there's no virtual arrangements in place. What I do know is that there's probably virtual meetings taking place, and I would suggest that sometimes perhaps that's not particularly helpful for families to engage in. If you consider trying to have a very formal meeting about a child protection concern when you're in your front room, I think that raises some issues, and you're also on your own and not supported. I think that presents issues in relation to children and young people. We have discussed it at the board in relation to working from home. So it has been it's on one of the agendas in the last year.
Thank you for that. Councillor Pardesh.
Quick points, Chair. On page 83, it says 2 young people died from suicide. Could I possibly ask, Chair, if that is changed to died by suicide? I do believe, according to the Samaritans, that is considered the most appropriate and sensitive way of stating that. My last quick point, on page 84, it talks about the issues identified relating to the failure to capture the voice of the child, and it says lack of professional curiosity. Correct me if I'm wrong, it's not really something you can teach or train anybody to do. It's very much that gut feeling that human beings have. And I just hope and can assume that is constantly emphasised to our practitioners, that if something doesn't for a split second feel right, or it sets off something in your head and your heart, don't ignore it. Check it out with someone, well, whatever. That not listening to your own inner voice and your gut feeling, I can't help thinking is something that really needs to be given more priority, if it isn't already. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that.
Again, I can't disagree with you in relation to the issue that you raise. As professionals in the safeguarding system, we should be acutely aware of the circumstances in which children live and the issues that they're in, and asking the right questions. And I think those are really crucial elements of the work that, when you talk about professional, I personally don't like the term professional curiosity because it should be people's job. We should be professionally curious regardless. It shouldn't be something that's told that we should be. We should be professionally curious because that's our job in relation to safeguarding children and young people. I think it sometimes gets, that the process gets lost in challenging capacity, and, if you've got, several children on your caseload that you're visiting that day, the priority it takes. I think there's all sorts of different factors that take into account why people don't ask the right questions at the right time. But as I say, I think it's probably something that supervision should be also a focus on. When people are having one-to-one supervisions with their line manager, they should be having those conversations. They should be challenged around, those sorts of questions that prompt so-called professional curiosity.
Thank you for that. I also think along those lines, we have had a previous issue about our ability to change reports. I don't know where we are with that, but the way that we describe suicide, I think, is important. So maybe if we can't alter this report, then that's something that we need to make sure that we get right in the future. I think you're absolutely right when it comes to using professional curiosity. I know that the police now have use something called APPS, Approved Professional Practice, which is, as you describe, making sure you ask the right questions, rather than it just being a gut feeling, as important as that is. Sometimes people don't ask the relevant questions, and I think that we could perhaps learn something from the way that the police are moving forward with that. Just a couple of other points as well. I was interested, well, thank you first of all for describing your role, that scrutineer type role, and I'll come on to that in just a second if I could. And your description of being interested in outcomes. And I know that on page 18, it talks about, as we move forward, it's this so what factor. So what difference have we made? I was really pleased to see reference within the report to Catch-22, an organisation that I've worked for and with this authority for some time. And we might be well overdue a presentation from Catch-22. I know the last time they came, they boasted some very impressive figures about that sort of tenacity of approach in finding missing young people. I think the average at the time of young people that were spoken to who went missing was, I'm making the figures up, but I'm sure it was something like 30% nationally. Here in Staffordshire with Catch-22, they were in the 80s. So we were they were making appointments, that sort of dogged persistence about finding people. And if that's still the case, we should recognise the valuable role that Catch-22 play. Interestingly also about hearing the voice of the child, certain members will recall here that we wanted to do precisely that over the last couple of months with our young carers, people that look after either siblings or relatives. And I'm pretty sure I speak for those who went to those meetings. It was a real eye-opener. It was an emotional experience for us. And I think I'll just echo your view about wanting to do that. It was an incredibly valuable thing for us to do. And I also just wondered whether there was an opportunity, if you do plan anything to speak to young people, whether there's an opportunity for maybe, as we did with young carers, for members to play a part in that. I don't know whether it's appropriate or whether it would even be practical. But certainly I think those members that went along to the young carers still to this day talk about just how useful that was. Not least of all, it highlighted to us the important role of schools, and I know you've already emphasised that. And we identified some incredibly good practice, and we also identified schools that have best described as a need to improve. And for that reason, I think it is a bit concerning that schools aren't part of the board. The discussions around the MASH, I think, have gone on for a long time. My only concern with that is I'm sure that someone at some stage must have sat in this room and made a very passionate argument that the two should come together. I'm sure they would have talked about sharing information, partner agencies only having to come to one. I can hear all of the arguments now. And for it now to be separate, without any real clear indication, so I think that we deserve, as a group, some explanation. Doesn't have to be greatly detailed, but why is it now that that's no longer the case when someone would have made, as I say, a passionate argument for the two? I think the other thing I was going to mention is about missing. I think there's a difference between being missing and missing from school. Both are important, of course. And for those members who weren't aware, Ofsted did a report about vulnerable people being missing from school late last year, and that's one of the things that we're fitting into the work programme as we move forward. It came up with some worrying conclusions. No great surprise that if vulnerable young people aren't at school, they're not then subject to all of the initiatives to help them, and actually they're more likely to be known to other agencies, more likely to be involved in crime. So that's something that we do have on the work programme as we move forward. The question, just going back to your role as a scrutineer, if I could, and again, it is that bit of this, this committee is about holding people to account and asking those difficult questions, so you'll have to forgive me here. But when I read this report, it's sort of a report of two halves, isn't it? The beginning seems to be very ambitious. It talks in very grand terms about innovative ways that we're going to move forward, what we're going to do. It sounds very grand. But then hidden at the back end of the report are these inevitable reviews. I think you described the police one as being a little negative. I think that's probably a good description. When you read what the police are trying to do then, it is quite concerning, recognising that the training isn't right and various other things. And I made a note here, you talked about the Young Offenders Institute, and the chair of the Review of Restraint group escalated concerns to the board and seeking assurances on a monthly basis. So we have a report that has a lot of stuff at the start that is very promising, very encouraging. When we come to reviews, perhaps the two don't quite match in reality. So can I ask as a scrutineer, and I apologise for putting you on the spot, is this report over-ambitious? Are we promising to the future when actually in a scrutiny role we should be trying to get the basics right, which it tends to suggest we're not getting right at the moment? And should our focus therefore be on doing that, not making these wonderful promises to the future?
That's a helpful challenge. I think in relation to the scrutiny role, and I think from my perspective, it is important to highlight, I think, that some of the issues that remain as a challenge, and I think it's my role to go and then focus on those issues. So one of the things that I have to say, the board and the partnership has not had a scrutiny role prior to this. So prior to 6 months ago, they had a board chair who just chaired the board meeting. And they've taken the active decision to have a scrutineer role alongside the chairing of the board. And I think the issues that you raise are things that's my role to go and look into. And as part of my contractual arrangements, I sought agreement from the safeguarding partners to go and look at things that I feel need to be looked at. So they're not going to determine what I choose to scrutinise. It's going to be down to the issues that I see that are being raised, and I've highlighted some of those in my presentation, but also in relation to things that perhaps just pop up out of the blue. And I think the issues that, for example, as I said, around the police inspection, the inspection into Warrington, I feel that the board needs to be on the front foot on those issues rather than chasing the issue. And I think it's reflected some of that in the report in terms of some of the challenges those present. And I don't deny about the fact that when you read through the last few pages, you kind of read all of the issues that are coming out from learning reviews, for example. And that, I think, is an issue that we do need to develop and think about, because it suggests, therefore, that we're not doing the things that we should be doing effectively. So that is an area of scrutiny that I'll be focusing on this year.
Thank you. I think that's a really positive move forward, to be fair. It does concern me that, sometimes I understand the reasons why. And again, we've got case studies of successes, but you can't get away from that bit at the back end that says not only are there areas for improvement, but in some areas they're quite incredibly poor. And I think it's a wonderful step forward that we have your role and your commitment to actually, because I just think we need to know the truth, and we need to know what the service is, what it looks like, and then perhaps try to move forward with it. rather than endless promises about, you know, how good it's going to be sort of jam tomorrow, you know, when we actually need to be realistic about if we're looking after the interests of young people. So I really welcome that. Thank you for doing that. I don't think there's any other questions being indicated. No. Again, thank you for the report, and thank you very much for coming along and answering the questions honestly. It's quite refreshing to have a scrutineer as opposed to a sponsor of a report, and your answers, you know, very truthful and very open and honest. So thank you very much for that. I think it's been a worthwhile exercise for all of us. Thank you again. We'll move quickly on to then item 7 in the work programme. Over to Helen.
Okay, so conscious of time, so I'll race through. We had a pre-decision scrutiny item on the house project, which was going to be included on our February agenda. We've been asked to move that back because there needs to be some further work on that. So hopefully April, depending on how much further work there needs to be done on that particular item. Following the triangulation discussions, I've invited Reverend Metcalfe to the February meeting because that's where we're expecting the executive's response to the inquiry day report on sexual harassment in education. We have put an item on for April, the April meeting, around the issue that was raised at the last one, which is the safeguarding concerns around children who are permanently excluded from school. And to that meeting, we've invited the chairman of Prosperous, Tina Clements, because obviously there's a clear crossover between the two. We've also included an item on dolls, updating yourselves on the backlog, which obviously was something that's been addressed, people have been working on addressing for some time. And also looking at adult safeguarding assessments was suggested to be included at that triangulation meeting. From today, picking up items from today is maybe something that looks on something in more detail on online issues of abuse and also possibly within that grooming. And just to say that obviously we've got two more more scheduled meetings for this municipal year in February and April. I can't believe we're at the end of it already. So we will be looking at planning the work programme for the next municipal year. Obviously there's some issues there that will probably cross over to that, and there are some others that we've been discussing, haven't we, in triangulation with cabinet members. But if members have anything that they want including on the work programme, please let the chair, vice chair or myself know, and we can start looking at planning that as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any issues on the work? No? I don't think there are any other items. So thank you very much for coming along, and again thank you to our guests and authors of reports. If those few people of the Conservative Party could remain just, and I'll keep it to 10 minutes unless you have to go, of course, I'd very much appreciate that. If you want to get another coffee or something, please feel free.